This is Twisted Passages with award-winning author Marie Sutro. Now, let's take a deep dive into the dark world of psychological thrillers and meet the authors who created them.
Hello, and welcome to Twisted Passages. I'm your host, Marie Sutro, and today we'll be talking to New York Times bestselling author Amy Tintera about her new release, Listen for the Lie. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
I am so excited that you're here. This story is absolutely phenomenal, and before I start gushing, I would like you to start our listeners off with an overview of what it's about.
Sure. So Listen for the Lie is a mystery thriller about a woman named Lucy who is widely believed to have murdered her best friend 5 years earlier. And the book starts when a true crime podcaster takes up the case, and Lucy is forced to return to her hometown and help him solve the mystery, even if she is the one who did it.
Which is an absolutely amazing setup. And the way that you chose to tell this story was one of my favorite things, because the podcaster, his name is Ben, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Ben gets to tell some of the story through his podcast. I thought it was so ingenious how you use the actual podcast itself as a device for us to hear Ben's voice and his opinions as he's researching this case. Where did you get that idea?
Well, thank you. So I think the idea sort of it came along over the course of a few years. My very first podcast was Serial, probably like a lot of people. And I loved it. And I listened to some more true crime podcasts after that. And I had been thinking about writing a book that would be great on audio. And so immediately I thought, well, a podcast in a book is going to be great on audio. And I had just read Sadie by Courtney Summers, that's a young adult novel that does the same sort of thing. And so I just started really thinking that it could be such an interesting and fun way to get background on a story. And especially because I love writing dialogue. So it was very difficult, it turned out, but it was really a lot of fun.
It was so much fun to read because it was such a different storytelling style, right? It wasn't just the character, but I just felt you went so deep into Ben's character, because not only are you writing Ben, but you're writing Ben who's writing his own dialogue for a show. And that was absolutely amazing layers to it.
Oh, thank you.
Lucy, the protagonist, is an extremely strong female character. One might also say she's a little edgy. She's got a very sharp wit, she's sarcastic, and you kind of get the sense that she's been living under this scrutiny and this horrible cloud for 5 years. Mm-hmm. And she's lost a lot because of it. Is that kind of how you framed her, to inject that loss so profoundly into her that her devices are kind of sarcasm and sharp wit to deal with that?
Yeah, because when you start thinking about a character who has been living with the possibility that she murdered her best friend for 5 years, you start thinking, how does someone deal with that? What kind of defenses do they put up? And I am just a very sort of sarcastic person who makes jokes. And, I think a lot of us, we make jokes in uncomfortable or sad situations because it's all we know how to do. And so I just leaned hard into that with Lucy because I just figured that has probably become her coping mechanism.
One of the other things I loved was the setting. This small town in Texas. I'm always, just as a student of humanity, it's always interesting to me how if a crime happens in a city, we just say, oh, that's the city, bad things happen there. But in small towns, we have this sense that, oh, this shouldn't happen here, or it couldn't or wouldn't happen here. And I think probably investigating crimes, one of the things I felt that you did really well was there's almost more difficulty perhaps for the law enforcement because the folks in the small town don't want it to be their town. And, like the Murdaugh case it's been all over the news lately, right? There's been a lot of issues around how much do people want to share, and how much are they sharing, and how much are they influenced by relationships? Is that something you wanted to get into and dig into with the small town environment?
Yeah, I think so. Because, I grew up in the city. I grew up in Austin. But I think that I have always been kind of fascinated by small towns. I lived sort of on the outskirts of Austin. So I had sort of a dual experience of a small town, like right outside of Austin, and being pretty close to downtown as well. But yeah, I think I've always been sort of fascinated by the community that springs up in small towns. And also, yeah, just the stories that you tell yourself, even just in communities too, like this sort of thing just doesn't happen here. And so if you just like don't really deal with it, they can't ever really solve the mystery, because they've made a decision about what happened, and they've made a decision about what kind of town Plumpton is, and that's that.
The title, Listen for the Lie. I was so intrigued from the first page. And again, you use this great listening technique where we are reading, but we're kind of reading with the ear of a listener for the podcast elements. And I realized that we are listening all the time. Even when we are reading, we're listening for falsehood, especially if it's a crime novel or especially a psychological thriller. Was it important to you to fuse those two concepts? Do you think that we do need to listen more?
Oh, I had not thought of that, but yes, for sure. I think we need to listen more. What's funny about the title is that I actually didn't come up with it. I could not figure out what to call this book. It had several different titles. My agent suggested a title when we went on submission to publishers. That one wasn't really right either. We just sort of picked one. And there was my editor who came up with the title, Listen for the Lie. And I think it's one of the reasons that he was a great person to buy the book, is because he really understood it. And he came up with a title that, when he came up with it, I was like, obviously, like, why didn't I think of that before? That's the obvious thing. But yeah, it's perfect, because I do think that we all need to listen more. And I think that sort of comes into play with the podcast in the book, because something that the people say, or something that that Lucy says, or that other people say, is that, the truth doesn't matter. And the truth is whatever Ben says it is, because Ben is the one who has the power, because he's the one speaking. He's the one with the microphone. And so I do think that something that my editor understood about the book was that we all maybe should listen a little bit more and a little bit less talking.
Well, I'm so glad you brought up the word power, because one of the things that I thought was so profound in this story, not only do you have this amazing page turner, we have to find out who killed her best friend Savvy, and was it her?
Right.
Lucy's jury even on herself is out. She doesn't know. Maybe it was me.
Yeah.
Was the way that you delved into power dynamics in society, and the fact, going back to the title, listening. It seemed like there were a lot of characters who weren't listened to in this story, and there were other characters that were readily listened to. And we have so much of that in our society, where certain voices are marginalized and certain voices are exalted. What was it in those interplays? Because it looked like there was a lot of male voices that really were listened to repeatedly, and the female voices not so much.
Yeah, that was that was sort of one of the biggest things I wanted to explore in the book, is who we listen to and why, and how we end up doing that, even I think without realizing it. Like, we don't sit down and say, I think I'm going to listen to what the man said. It's just sort of ingrained into us, from a very young age. So I wanted to explore that. And it was a very deliberate choice to make the podcaster a man, and to make Lucy a woman, because I thought that would just be a really interesting sort of dynamic, and a really great way to explore who we listen to and who we believe.
It was. And thinking about truth, it was interesting, because as Lucy's listening to the podcast, she's listening with the objectivity of someone who's been out of the town for 5 years, and with the in-depth knowledge of the victim that other people didn't have.
Right.
And one of the things I noticed was there was this, which I think happens a lot right? After people pass, we tend to look back on their entire existence with rose-colored glasses and see them as this angelic being, which I think is a good thing, right? That we want to see the good in people and remember the good.
Right.
But when you're investigating a murder, it might not be the best thing. You need to have that objectivity. The podcast allowed you to do that again, to highlight the way that people, all these different responses they have to the victim Savvy. What were your thoughts about Savvy, and how do you see her?
So I loved Savvy because I think she's a very complicated person, and that was something that I wanted to bring out in the podcast, is that she had been sort of, she'd been molded into someone who was not complicated at all. Like, she was a very nice young woman who just wanted to come home, and she wasn't going to finish college. She was just too sweet for it all. And I think we definitely have that tendency to sort of put people into certain boxes, especially women, and especially in this case, to kind of to pit women against each other and to make Lucy the devil and Savvy the angel. And that was something that I really, really wanted to explore, and what if this woman who has been determined to be the angel was actually a much more well-rounded person, a real person.
Yeah, I actually loved Savvy once I got to know her better.
Right.
It was awesome. She was an amazingly strong character, and it was interesting how, in trying to do the right thing by her and see all the positive qualities that, and I wonder if this goes back to what you were saying before about things that are kind of baked into the cake in society. They wanted to sweeten Savvy, and they wanted to say how great she was, but in doing so, they really took away a lot of her strength.
Yeah, exactly. They really did. Because I think the image that we have of sort of a perfect woman and angel is not actually a super interesting person. If she's just sort of floating above us all, being so sweet and nice, that's not really the sort of person that I want to write either. It's kind of a boring character.
It's very true. And like I said, I really loved her. I loved Lucy, and the two of them together. If you ever want to write a prequel about Savvy and Lucy, I'll be all over it. Getting back to that concept of the male and female roles, it also appeared that if females fought back in any which way, verbally, intellectually, that wasn't valued, and women standing up for themselves in general wasn't necessarily valued. Lucy's relationship with her mom is a really interesting foil. She's a very interesting foil to Lucy in many ways, because it's almost like mom would rather get along to go along. And Lucy doesn't seem life that way, does she?
Right. No, I don't think so. I think that is maybe a little bit of a generational thing as well. I think the previous generations, and Lucy's mom's generation, it was appearances were very important, and just pretending like everything was fine on the outside was the most important thing. And if there was any problems at home or any problems anywhere, you kept it there. You never told anyone about it. And I think Lucy had a little bit of a hard time with that. I mean, I think you see that she internalized some of that, and that she also still had that feeling that I need to figure out any problems that I have at home by myself. But she also, I think she wasn't as interested in projecting perfection the way that her mom was. And I think that was probably a very difficult balance for her to try to figure out how to exist in the world when you're not sure how you want to present yourself and present your problems to the world.
Exactly. And I loved that generational disconnect. But then you did something even more interesting. You jumped a layer in the generation, and you gave us Lucy's grandma.
Oh, grandma.
She's at 80, I want to be Lucy's grandma. That's my goal now. It's on my vision board. I want to be Lucy's grandma. What was kind of your thought in that layering in each of the generations and what you were trying to show about women there?
So I was very specifically thinking of how I wanted to portray older women, because Lucy's grandma in the book is 80 years old, and I just thought that we could always use more portrayals of older women as well-rounded people and not just like grandmas who are in the background. Lucy's grandma has had like a very full life. Her husband has passed away, but now she has like a whole new part of her life starting in a way. Like she's got all these boyfriends, she's got this new pink tiny house. And so I was very deliberately thinking about how I would want to live my life at 80, but also how I would want to be reading books when I'm 80. Like if I was going to see a character who is an older woman, like what would I want to see? So it was in my mind the whole time, for sure.
Yeah, she was absolutely phenomenal. And again, you gave us so many glimpses into the female experience and how it plays out, especially in small towns, and perhaps the ways that we can grow. And there's choices that you present to us. You can grow like Lucy's mom, which maybe isn't as much growth.
Right.
Or you can grow like her grandma, who's looking back over the course of 80 years and saying, hey, I did this, and now I realize here's where it could have, should have, and would have gone.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So with this story, the police don't feature predominantly in it. The investigator in this case is really Ben. And Ben has an assistant, Paige. What were your thoughts about the Ben and Paige relationship? She's helping him there. She's kind of a minor character, but also an important character who kind of keeps him in check, right?
Right. Yeah. I felt like I didn't want to portray him as doing everything on his own, like some sort of Superman. So I figured he should have sort of an assistant who was very skeptical of him. She had not like jumped on the Ben hype train. And I think I decided on that just because I don't find police work super interesting as a writer. Like I didn't want to delve into it. I didn't want a police character. I just thought it was a lot more interesting if the police had sort of given up and I could have these other two characters who were the ones solving the mystery. So they are sort of the team that takes over for the police, Ben and Paige.
And I thought that was so awesome because in terms of, the concept of an amateur sleuth, Ben actually is really good at what he's doing. He's digging but he's got that journalism background, right?
Right. Yeah.
So he's able to get pretty far. And I feel like he might have some other skills too, like psychology skills, some other things that are helping him do that job, right?
Yeah, he has some skills and he knows it. He's confident in his abilities, for sure.
One of the things, obviously lie is in the title. So we're listening. And you mentioned truth and the fact that certain people can control the narrative and determine what is truth. But the truth still exists somewhere underneath whatever people are telling you. So what do you think about that concept of, kind of with Lucy's mom, go along to get along? Or it's easier to believe this because everybody in town believes it. That sense that the truth still does exist. What was the most important thing for you to have readers take away from that kind of discourse that was constant, right? Do we accept the promulgated truth, or do we accept and dig for the reality underneath, no matter how uncomfortable?
Right. I think what I wanted readers to take away is that things are often a lot more nuanced than we make them out to be. I struggle with this a lot in like the internet age. I'm often, I'm told stories about something or someone, and it's just presented in a very like straightforward, one-sided manner. And I think it's really easy to just go along with whatever you hear, like whatever TikTok you watch, and just accept it as truth. And so I think that was one of the things that I was really struggling with while I was writing the book, was my own feelings of who do you believe? Like, when do you believe them? Like, it's really tough when you're bombarded with the amount of information that we are these days. And sometimes we're bombarded with information that is like very well supported by, I don't know if they're facts exactly, but supported by something. And so it's just, we live in a really complicated time, I think, and it's hard to figure out what to believe and who to believe. So I think the whole book was me sort of figuring that out for myself and saying, maybe the truth is really hard to figure out sometimes. Maybe we all just need to take a step back and look at the nuance and think about it.
Well, I am so grateful that you did, because it's something I think we're all grappling with. You know, the more we look at the impact of social media and the immediacy of our lives, you know, I think it's so easy to look at clickbait, an inflammatory title, you know, and say, oh my gosh, that must be horrible. And then if there's a video clip or one thing, it's easy to go judge, jury, and executioner and say, oh, okay. And the way that you showed us people doing the same thing in this story really shines a light on each of us as individuals and makes us look and say, wait, are we doing that? Are we jumping on the bandwagon? Are we even sometimes well-intended thinking, oh, this is such an egregious thing? And in our world, once it's out there, people don't necessarily see a correction after something bad happens, right?
Yeah.
So damage is done, and showing us Lucy's damage was so really, really so powerful.
Oh, thank you. That is definitely what I was going for, because it's a weird, scary time that we live in.
It is. Okay, so 2 more questions. I promised it would be short, but I'm loving talking to you. Like I said, I love the book, so I apologize if I'm going
No problem.
a little too deep. Gaslighting. There are some gaslighters in this book. Is there anything we can do to defend against gaslighters? Because it seems like they're really good at what they do a lot of the time.
They are. You know, I don't know. I think sometimes it's just like talking to people and trying to keep your own thoughts straight. Like I check in with people sometimes, like, that happened, right? Like, do I remember that right? Like, was that the truth? What did I say last time? So I think just trying to like confiding in people, or just keeping your own thoughts straight sometimes. But it's incredibly difficult. And I think sometimes it's something that people can't understand until you experience it yourself, the way that your reality can shift when somebody else sort of says, oh no, that didn't happen. You know, or it did happen. It's
someone
hard.
That is important to you in your life, that you want to get along with and you want to be aligned with. I thought that was incredibly powerful, how you showed it from that perspective. It's one thing if the guy at the grocery store says, hey, you know, you cut me off in the parking lot, and you're like, no, that was the other car. That wasn't me.
Right. Yeah.
You need to walk away from that. But when it's someone who is central to your well-being and your happiness, it does change the dynamic.
It does. Yeah. And it's very difficult. So it was something that I really wanted to portray in the book.
Well, you did it well. My last question for you is, I know you have a very successful history in the YA realm, and I am just curious, is your YA stuff as heavy hitting as this?
You know, I don't think most of it, no, except for the book All These Monsters, which is about cycles of abuse. And it's about a girl who decides that going out and fighting monsters in Europe is preferable to her abusive home life, which says a lot. But yeah, so that's probably the only one that I would say that deals with the same sort of themes as Listen for the Lie.
Well, I'll be out looking for a lot more of your books. I absolutely loved this. It was a phenomenal read.
Oh, thank you.
Where can other fans of you find your work and learn more about you?
So in terms of social media, I mostly use Instagram. I'm just at Amy Tintera. I also have a Substack newsletter, which I use to keep readers up to date with, you know, sales or just like new books coming out, or just like a little bit of chatting about writing. So those are my 2 main places.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Amy. Again, Listen for the Lie. Absolutely a fantastic read. And
thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And thank you all for joining us on this episode of Twisted Passages. We hope to see you next time.